Question 1. In what ways does a media product use, develop, or challenge forms and conventions of real media products? In the making of my A2 coursework, I chose a print product which I collaborated with my classmates, and we produced 2 newspaper editions along with the page 2s of the newspaper. The name of our local tabloid newspaper is called Rotherham Gazette and is aimed at mature adults from the ages 34 to 64 years of age in the social classes C1, C2, D, E, as this is where there was a gap in the market. In the making of the print product, we also had to design a poster advert for our newspaper as well as a radio advert to advertise our product and to create synergy to help advertise our newspaper. In the making of the newspaper, we clearly followed generic conventions of newspapers, whereby we had lead stories for both editions, just like how other tabloid newspapers do. The lead stories are identified by microelements, which are the big pictures that would have been encoded in the headline with bold words in impact font. And this was because these microelements would connote to the audience the importance of the story, also clearly showing that this is the lead story of our newspapers, therefore being a microelement. We then had subheadings for our lead stories, as they all anchored the meaning of the articles because we wanted them to have a close reading. An example would be the Christmas edition, as it was about children not being in school because of the snow. So my headline was "Snow Causes School Closures." I then encoded an image of a bulldozer cleaning out the snow to pin down and anchor the meaning of the text, just like how real media products do. To anchor the image, I added a caption to go along with the picture and my article. Hence, Roland Barthes suggested that all photographs are anchored in newspapers via captions, and captions are part of newspaper conventions. In so doing, I have avoided creating an open text for my newspaper. This therefore created disequilibrium because there was a binary opposition of good versus bad, of which the antagonist was nature because of the terrible snow that affected the country, while the protagonist was the bulldozer clearing out the snow out of colleges. Once the binary opposition was established by the image added to the article, as it is done in the same way by real media products like the Sheffield Star, hence the mise-en-scène of the picture mediated a closed meaning to the audience because a bulldozer is shown in a portrait image moving forward, digging out the snow. Another example would be in the November edition, we also had a binary opposition of good versus evil, where we had a family that was affected by the bad judgment of a police on a knife crime, therefore enhancing that media text have binary oppositions. In the production of our local newspaper, we designed a masthead for the newspaper, and the masthead was called Rotherham Gazette. We designed the masthead using the font from Photoshop, Franklin Gothic Demi-Conte. We used this font because it looked more like the mastheads that we saw in previous local newspapers that we researched, like The Sun. After looking at the semiotic signs of the mastheads, as well as what each masthead is trying to mediate to its target audience, we then knew how our masthead should look like because it had to have attention to detail for our target audience. We then found out that the mastheads connote boldness, being strong, tough, protection, and pride at the same time, of which this was the mode of address we were trying to mediate to our target audience when they denote the text. The reason we found out what the mastheads connote is because we wanted to avoid mediating the wrong information to our target audience, as our text should be closed and not open. In both our newspapers, we encoded competition plugs because this was one of the generic conventions used by newspapers like the Sheffield Star. We also used graphic images that are used by the Star newspaper. Like for our Christmas edition, we used the graphic image of a Christmas tree to enhance that we are following generic conventions of real media products. For our newspaper, we also encoded microelements such as dates to mediate to our audience how old the news in the newspapers are. We also had generic conventions like roll-offs to connote that the story is continued on the second page. In the manufacturing of our product, we reported real-life events, therefore it meant we had to have a body text and a headline on what we were reporting about, as this was one of the general conventions we could not challenge because the majority of newspapers we researched body text, as it is an important newspaper convention that we had to follow. Our mastheads that we used for both editions had to have linguistic codes, as Jonathan Bignell suggested that bad news is good news to the audience. Having body text meant that we had to flow with the general conventions of having a byline because this is what mediates to the audience who the reporter of the article is. Like any other tabloid newspaper, we had adverts at the bottom of the corner of our newspapers because we wanted our product to look like real tabloid newspapers that you will see in stores being sold, like the Sheffield Star. In the production of our newspaper, we did challenge one of the conventions of real media products because we did not have a half-lit story on our newspaper editions, like how other local newspapers like the Sheffield Star do. This therefore means that we were being creative, rearranging the old, even though we followed the conventions of the Sheffield Star newspaper. We again went on to follow the conventions of the Sheffield Star on having a weather update for our audience to make our product look like any real product because we had to have attention to detail for our products. For the representation of our products, in the Christmas edition, we used an image of a bulldozer that was covered in snow because a bulldozer is a connotation of trouble and chaos. Hence, we wanted to anchor what the subgenre of our newspaper were appealing to our target audience and avoid our images being polysemic. Therefore, we said that our local newspapers had to have a closed text. In the other edition of our newspaper, we used an image of the villain because as our newspaper is a tabloid newspaper, we decided to follow the general conventions by looking at the kind of images they use for their stories. So, we therefore encoded an image of a villain as this will make our newspaper look like a real tabloid newspaper. These were the simplistic representations that could have been expected to be seen on a local newspaper when an audience looked at the newspaper. We were being creative, as Bentley quoted that being creative can be the rearranging of the old. This shows that we copied the themes of newspapers from real media conventions but just changed a variety of things, and by so doing we made pastiche products because if we had to make parodies, they would put our newspapers in a position where they do not appeal to our target audience. For the genre of our newspaper product, we created our own imaginary audience as Ian Young suggested in 1991 in order to reach out to our target audience. This is what is done by other media producers as they create their own imaginary audience to develop and market their text. By creating our own imaginary audience, it will help our newspaper reach out to its target audience, as audiences use genre to decide what text to consume, decode. Like if they want to read certain text in the newspaper, they will be aware of the genre and its general conventions. Since our product is a local tabloid newspaper, we then had a house style that we followed, of which we followed the general conventions of the Star newspaper, therefore meaning that our product was written in tabloid style. The reason our newspaper is written in tabloid style is because we want our target audience to easily understand the text encoded onto your newspaper, as we basically used restricted code language. The reason why our newspaper was written in restricted code language is because all the information that we have encoded onto our text is understandable to our target audience and should be easy to read even for a 12-year-old because media texts like the Star and the Sun are written in house styles that even young audiences can still decode and interpret information from the text. Most local newspapers are of the people of which why the products are produced for them and from them. Therefore, our newspaper is aimed at a niche audience of adults from the ages 34 to 64 years because it is aimed at an audience who are in the middle class, lower social classes, whereby everything to our audience is common and the mode of address for our newspaper is peer-to-peer as well as parent-to-child. Tim O'Sullivan in 1998 suggested that every media text tells some type of story, therefore meaning that every text that is mediated onto the audience speaks to them. For our local newspaper, we looked at stories that appealed to our audiences because we would be reporting to them examples of stories found in real media text, like my article on snow, talking about the problem and chaos the snow caused. So this means that the narrative can therefore be used by any producer to mediate to the audience real-life events, as it keeps the audience up to date with what is going on around them and issues affecting their local areas.